All right, everybody, we're live today. It it is another divisional preview. It is the AFC West this week. This AFC West is looking a little bit different than it was last year, just telling by the odds. Not going to get too much into it for those of you guys that are watching, but it is a little bit more separated this year. Before we get into it, though, Ben, how's it going? I see you sporting your Bills cap. Did you have a good weekend? You're the birthday boy. Happy belated birthday, by the way. Hope you had a good weekend. I know UFC was good for you. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, man, took a little trip down to Houston with some of the homies, and unfortunately, the Astros couldn't get it done. Really good game, 3-3 into the ninth, and the Astros closer came in and blew it. Jose Siri, of all people, ends up scoring the game-winning run, former Astro. So that was the only bad part of the trip and the weekend. Like you mentioned, the UFC card, we were pretty spot on for the most part. Good night of fights, a lot of finishes. Um, and just here back, ready to knock down another one of these NFL breakdowns, man. Looking forward. The preseason starts this Thursday. So football's here. Football's here.
Any surprises for you on Saturday night? I know you said you were, pretty spot on with the predictions. And for those of you guys that watched us last week, we broke down the main card, gave you all of our picks, which were pretty accurate for the most part. But were there any surprises for you, Ben?
Well, I mean, I was very surprised at the way that Justin Gaethje won his fight. We usually see him, if he gets any finishes, it's with, kicks to the legs and knocking play and, making fighters not be able to walk anymore. But he ended up hitting Dustin Poirier with a head kick, and Poirier had never been knocked out by head kicks. So pretty surprising. They showed that Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards highlight shitload of times throughout that broadcast after it happened, which was kind of, funny because Kamaru Usman was in there celebrating with Justin Gaethje, and they were pulling his highlight reel up on the Jumbotron. But really good night of fights, man. I'm glad Derek Lewis got back on the winning track. He had another great post-fight speech, post-fight interview moment, whatever you want to call it. But really, really good night of fights. Even the prelims went hard. So, yeah, very happy with UFC right now.
And I can't let you get out of here talking UFC 291 without talking about your boy, one of your favorite fighters. I just need to hear your take for what's next for Mr. 0-6 in his last 6 fights. Tony Ferguson did look good, though. I will give him that. Not making fun of him with that 0-6 mark. But any thoughts on him going forward?
No, yeah. I mean, a lot of people were calling that he should have taken off the gloves and retired there. I mean, he looked good till he got poked in the eye. I don't want to be one of those still holding hope. He did get poked in the eye pretty bad in that first round after he had dropped, Bobby Green. He took about 4 of the 5 minutes to recover from that eye poke. But, I mean, even when he's dodging punches, he just looks washed, man. So, yeah, for Tony, I know I was talking to Justin. There's a couple of fights, that they can match him up with, and he might still be able to win. That Jordan Levitt kid that fought Luke Flores, I think that he'd still be able to beat somebody like him. Terrence McKinney, if he can just get past the first 5 minutes with McKinney. So hopefully his next fight is his retirement fight. Hopefully he goes into that fight, with it announced, and it's kind of like that Robbie Lawler type deal, and they give him a very winnable fight. So would like to see the retirement fight for Tony Ferguson coming up.
Okay. Yeah, he's definitely got one more in him. I know he's going to be asking for it. Hopefully it's a winnable retirement fight. But let's get into it. The reason why we're here, AFC West talk, another divisional breakdown. We got the odds going into the season up here. The Chiefs, they are favored, -165. They were the short favorites last year, but if you remember, everybody had a plus number next to their name last year because they were calling for this to be a much closer division. You got the Chargers coming in at +340. The Denver Broncos with Sean Payton at the helm as their head coach at +550. And then the Raiders with Jimmy G taking over at quarterback at +1200. Vegas not expecting much of the hometown team. Ben, any high-level thoughts before we get into this division?
I saw a list of, we asked 50 GMs and front office personnel for the NFL, top 5 QB tier. People still have Justin Herbert in that top 5 tier, man. I know, Ron's a big Herbie guy. I don't know if he's gotten over it already as he went and blew a 17-point lead. 27-point lead to the Jacksonville Jaguars in the playoffs. But, Justin Herbert, I hope that people have caught on And yes, everything looks good, but when it needs to be done, man, he's just not that guy. So I was kind of disappointed to still see, a lot of Justin Herbert top 5 talk.
Nice. Interesting take there. I know Justin Herbert was dealing with some injuries last year that kind of impaired his play, but definitely didn't have the numbers that people were expecting. I think he put up a 25-10 stat line, so nothing really impressive when you're talking about being a top 5 quarterback. So good point there, Ben. Let's get into it. As we do here, we start top to bottom. We're going with the defending champs. These guys have won it every year since 2016. We talked about it last year when they were, people were trying to call for their demise. If you come at the champ, you better not miss. And, Patrick Mahomes is sitting up here another year, defending champs. They went 14-3, 7-1 at home, 7-2 on the road, swept the division, had a lot of close games. But when you got Patrick Mahomes at the home, there's 7-3 in those one-score games. Ben, were you surprised to see the Chiefs, with all their losses last year, with Tyreek Hill going out? That was a big talk. They rebuilt that offensive line in one offseason. Were you surprised to see them, carry that trophy at the end of the year?
I definitely was. I wasn't as surprised as Ron, though. Ron had some pretty, hot takes last year when it came to the Chiefs. A lot of Chiefs to miss the playoffs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we thought that the loss of Tyreek Hill was going to take a dynamic off of their game. But, they had Valdez-Scantling, who made some plays. I probably shouldn't be shouting him out, but Kadarius Toney ended up getting traded over there, scored some touchdowns, was fantasy relevant for a couple of weeks. He was a guy that late last season, people were talking about fantasy football waiver wire pickup late in the year. So, as long as Patrick Mahomes has those weapons, bro, they're going to be the favorite. And I think last year proved it, because last year I think the Chargers and the Broncos both had really close odds to win the division.
Yeah,
this year,
they did.
You see a lot bigger spread in the odds. So, yeah, I mean, he's solidified after that Super Bowl last year.
Yeah, and dare I say they're on the verge of that, that D word, the dynasty talk. You got to get 3. Patrick Mahomes knows it, so we'll see what this year's about, but definitely showed what they were about last year. And forgot to mention, Patrick Mahomes was the MVP last year also for the regular season. Let's go into their offseason, though. Let's see what they got going. Or actually, no, forget that. Let's go to their upcoming season schedules. Excuse that. Their strength of schedule is 28th based on win percentage from last year. They do start the season off with the Lions, probably one of the more exciting matchups, not one that you would expect to open up the season, seeing as the Lions didn't really, go that far in the playoffs. And then they got the Jaguars, Bears. But like I said in the beginning, 28th ranked strength of schedule. I know they are the division winner and the Super Bowl champ, so you expect to see a little bit of a tough schedule up there. But Ben, were you surprised looking at the schedule? Do you like it right away? Are you looking to bet this 11.5 for their 2023 season win total, or do you think that's a shade too high for you?
I mean, if they're going to want that first round bye in the playoffs, which they're one of those teams that's going to be, battling for it along with the Bengals, the Bills, and those other guys. But I think that you got to like the over. I will say, though, that first game against the Lions are going to be getting their rings that night. That's the first game of the season. Usually the Super Bowl champs have that game. So that's a sneaky spot. They say when the teams, that first game, when it's the ring ceremony, they can come out flat. And the Lions are a team that's really looking to build off what they were doing last year. And then week 2 at the Jags, another team that a lot of hype this year, team on the rise. Really looking forward to betting that over week 2. I can tell you that I'll guaranteed be on that, probably like over 57.5. But that's going to be a real high-scoring game. What I was surprised was when you said they had the 28th ranked schedule, because, I mean, they're the Super Bowl champs, division winners. Usually they tend to play all the other division winners. But, some teams have taken a step back. For example, the Packers, a team that they normally wouldn't play, right? But they won the division, so they're matched up. So, yeah, it's weird schedule. I think definitely they can get their 12, 13 wins, and I think that they're going to be aiming for that first-round bye because it was clutch for them this year.
Yeah, other odds on the board, plus 600 to win the Super Bowl, AFC Championship plus 330. To win the AFC West, as we noted at the beginning, minus 165. And Pat Mahomes to win the MVP plus 700. Didn't mention to make the playoffs because that is such a high odd right there. And I don't think they're going to miss it there. Looking at the schedule, my first take is I like the over 11.5. I can see them getting to 12, 13 wins, especially if they get off to a good start in the beginning of the year, because if they do take care of business at home against the Lions, I can see them going on a little bit of a streak there up until that maybe Chargers game. But the one thing that does concern me in the beginning of the schedule is kind of the rest factor. When you look at, going from the Jets, the Vikings, and Broncos, kind of a quick turnaround there. 3 games in, what is that,
11 days.
11 days, something like that. So, a lot to ask for there. Tough stretch, but these are the Super Bowl champs, and I think they're probably going to get that done. Jake over here talking Dak over picks. You can put it in the bag. It is at 13.5, I think. And he did say he wasn't throwing over 10 this year. So we'll see. We'll talk about that more in the NFC West or
Jake's
NFC
calling
East
cat
podcast. We'll see. All right, so we like the overs here. A little bit of a weird schedule, but definitely doable when you're the Kansas City Chiefs. But let's get into the offseason, look at the roster a little bit, then we'll get into some fantasy talk, as we all like to do here, especially with the Kansas City Chiefs. So when you look at what they did in the draft, round 1, they addressed some edge issues with Kansas State. Felix Uzama, last name, very athletic guy from what I can see just watching highlights. One of the more athletic guys out of the Big 12. Very good draft for that conference. Then you got wide receiver from SMU, address the offensive line, and then just going through the additions in the offseason, they address the offensive line because they did lose Orlando Brown, who was one of the bigger additions that they had the year prior at the left tackle position, who came over, I think, from the Ravens, if I'm not mistaken. So a little bit of addressing some issues there. Anything of note here for you, Ben, or just kind of business as usual for the Chiefs?
It's more like business as usual. It wasn't really the flashiest. Nothing really popped out. I know that one receiver that they got, they really like, I believe, Rashee Rice out of SMU. We know that last year they also took that wide receiver out of SMU, Skyler Moore, I believe is his name.
Moore he's from Western Michigan.
Really? I thought damn, my bad. Then I screwed up on that one. But those little SMU receivers are usually pretty shifty, small. They're game. So I did like that pickup. But yeah, nothing flashy for them. Kind of just adding some depth.
Are you surprised, or I know you said business as usual, and I'm kind of on the same side there. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But are you surprised they maybe didn't try and sign a big name wide receiver? Maybe bring in like an OBJ to help out that receiving core. Are you surprised they're rolling it out there with Kadarius, always injured, Tony, Travis Kelce, Hall of Famer another year. Then I think they got Richie James that they added, and then they still got MVS. So are you surprised they're rolling it out there with that group again?
I'm not surprised just because of their money situation, I would say. I mean, this extension is going to be coming up from Mahomes. I believe now that the market's getting reset, he's already talking about he's not getting paid enough, and he's on a ridiculous deal that he signed maybe a year or two ago. They got Travis Kelce, who they're paying, and that's wide receiver number 1. Like you said, Hall of Famer already, stamped, arguably the best tight end ever to play. So, no, I'm really not surprised. I think that they're going to play it through Kelce, and it's going to be like in basketball, playing through the big man. Defenses are going to crowd the big man down low. They're going to double the big, and it's going to open up the guys on the outside. Not necessarily the big play guys, but with the way Mahomes is able to extend these plays, these guys are able to get separation after they're done running their routes. You know what I mean? On broken down.
Yeah.
So I think it's no surprise here for Andy Reid and the Chiefs not really going out there and maybe getting a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, right? Who was out there looking for
DeAndre Hopkins, another guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so good take there. And before we get into fantasy, let's go back one more time into the season schedule, look at their odds and whatnot. Ben, is there anything here, just when we talk about the overall outlook before we get into fantasy for the Kansas City Chiefs, that you want to say? Like, do you think they're going to repeat? Do you foresee some problems for them this year? What's your take on the Chiefs?
I think the only thing here, like with real value, would be to win the Super Bowl, right? Because they have Mahomes, and you expect them to at least be in the AFC title game, if not the Super Bowl. So I think plus 600 on the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl. Who knows if the odds get better than that? You know what I mean?
Get better throughout
So
the year.
yeah, I would just say there, the Mahomes MVP, that could always happen. I don't know how the NFL really is about giving players MVP back to back, like the NBA does, but I would go with to win the Super Bowl, if anything, because that's really what has the value.
Yeah, to win the Super Bowl plus 600. Mahomes last year, I want to say he was plus 1,000 going into the season to win to win MVP. So those odds have shrunk a little bit, but I'm kind of with you there. And I also like the over. I can see them getting to 12 or 13 with the schedule.
Because that to win the Super Bowl, Roland, like once you have that play in and the playoffs start, you really don't even have to be messing with the Chiefs games in the playoffs, right?
Yeah,
You
no,
can just root for your plus 600.
just let it roll. Exactly. And if you do get there, having plus 600 in the bag is something nice to have there. So let's get into fantasy. We're both bullish on the Chiefs this year. Both probably going to be on them to win the division. Although those minus 165 odds, I mean, depending how you look at it, doesn't offer that much value. But let's look at the fantasy football aspect for this team. Patrick Mahomes ranked in ESPN right now as QB1 in all formats. Isaiah Pacheco, Jerick McKinnon, running backs 27 and 46 respectively. And then you got the receivers we were talking about earlier, Tony and Moore at 46 and 55. I do want to point something out, Ben. I'm looking at ESPN right now. That's probably the more popular drafting site for everybody that's drafting nowadays. And looking at PPR, they have this thing now called live draft trends. I don't know exactly where this is coming from, but right now, Patrick Mahomes' ADP is 13.4. That's round 2, pick 1. And we did leave out Kelsey, that he's tight end 1 or 2. That's a omission on my part. Good call out, Bull. But Ben, what are your thoughts on Mahomes' ADP right now? Are you buying that?
No, I'm not buying that. I think that's pretty high. And I wonder if that scoring system is quarterbacks get 6 points on touchdowns or 4. Because I know in leagues where they get 4, their ADP is going to draft a little bit rather than getting 6 points per touchdown. So, but as far as the fantasy, man, to be honest, there's not a lot I want to touch. And that's weird because it's the Chiefs, right? You know, they're going to score points, but they spread it around. They spread it around well. So if it's not Mahomes, if it's not Kelsey, who Bull mentioned wasn't on the list, I thought maybe we left him out just because of how obvious it was, right? He's the top tight end going. But
his ADP is 6.
Yeah, he's going right after Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. And shout out Bull, because he was up there here this weekend, and he was like, hey, let's run some mock drafts. So we started mock drafting. Got about 5-10 mock drafts in while we were on this little vacation. And I was really surprised with a lot of these ADPs, man, like you just mentioned, with Mahomes and Josh Allen going so high, the 2 quarterbacks. But for them, like Josh had mentioned earlier, Isaiah Pacheco last year in that flex position, some people had to put him in the RB2 position. But Pacheco, I would look at around a flex option. Kadarius Toney, I would also look at as a flex option. Maybe you're in a league that has 3 wide receivers. I know, like you said, he's not the most consistent guy because he's always hurt. He's street clothes, the NFL so far in his career. But, man, when he's been on the field, he just has to get 3 or 4 touches, and he finds the end zone. In the red zone, he was really good last year.
Electric.
So, yeah. As I'll draft Kelsey if I have pick 6 or 7 and he's there. Mahomes, I don't think that I'm taking a quarterback in the 3rd round this year, so I'm just going to have to pass on Mahomes. And Pacheco and Tony are the 2 guys that I'm interested in.
So just a quick question for you. If you're picking, I guess, 6 and Cooper Kupp just goes off the board, are you taking Kelsey, Hill, or Robinson? Those are the guys that are at the top of the draft board at that point.
I'll take Kelsey over those 2 guys.
Okay, cool. So you're running with Kelsey at 6. You're buying that ADP. I too was surprised with Mahomes going as high as he is, but he scored touchdowns last year. He threw over 40 touchdowns. He's going to throw for yards, and if the Chiefs are winning, it's because Mahomes is putting up numbers right now. So going to be interesting to see this team throughout the year. I'm probably not buying anybody on this list. I won't draft Kelsey at 6. I've never drafted Kelsey in the 1st round. I know he's won some leagues some years, so I'm probably missing out on stuff.
Do you not think that he's worth the ADP or what?
I just think when you're drafting a guy that high, he has to separate himself by so many points from the next guy at his position to make it worth it, or even a guy you're comparing him at receiver now because he's getting drafted that high. So I haven't done it because of that, but he's proven his worth every year. I mean, if you've gotten him, he's done wonders for you. But the reason why I haven't done it is because I just find roster construction to be tougher when you draft a tight end right off the bat, because then you're dealing already at the end of the middle of the second round with second-rate receivers and running backs. You're having to make some tough decisions there. So yeah, I just find it to be a little bit harder to do that.
And you see, I tend to agree, but I think that he is the exception.
Yeah,
I think
he has proven to be.
A couple of years ago, Darren Waller was going, at end of the second rounds, early third rounds after he had his monster year. We've seen George Kittle go really high as well. But for Kelsey, bro, the advantage at that position, you're going to have it every single week. It's a position that some people even stream, so they just straight up punt. So you might get a 20-point advantage because of how consistent Kelsey is. So I do think that he is the exception, and that's why I say that he's the number one option for the best quarterback in the NFL. I mean, come on, right? And we got Roland. How do you feel about mock drafts? We're getting some shade over here in the comments about mock drafts.
Oh, I like to mock draft. I always mock draft, especially just for the ADP. Like I started mock drafting a couple of weeks ago, and I saw that the quarterbacks were going super high. So that kind of influenced my thinking in the keeper league that we're in. I don't want to talk too much about personal stuff, but I have Josh Allen. I drafted him in the 4th round last year. And most drafts that I've seen, he's going in the 2nd round. So to me, I think that's some value right there. Let me keep Allen in the 4th now. So, just doing stuff like that. That's the main reason why I do it, just to see kind of where everybody's going in the draft at a particular year, because it changes from year to year. But yeah, I'm not against it at all. But let's get into the next team on the list, another fantasy-friendly team that I'm sure we're going to have fun talking about. But it's none other than the Los Angeles Chargers. Different coach, different quarterback. No more Phillip Rivers. It's been Herbert the last couple of years, but it's the same Chargers. 2nd place in the AFC West, 10-7, 5-3 at home, 5-4 on the road. Didn't do so well against the division, 2-4. They blew that lead against the Jags that everybody saw in the wild card weekend, 27-point lead. And again, getting to the close games, it's not a Chargers season that they don't play a lot of close games. They had 12 games decided by a score or less, and they were 7-5 in those games. Ben, I know people were kind of high on the Chargers last year. You liked the Raiders a little bit more in the AFC West last year. Are you, not surprised to see the Chargers back in the same spot?
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all because, the guy here in the picture and the hype that, people still have over him. You know how adamant I was about saying Russell Wilson wasn't elite and how I planted my flag, died on that hill. Finally, the light has come, and some people are saying, you know what, maybe Russell Wilson isn't elite, right? He's a bottom, he's definitely out of the top 10 now. He's out of the top 15, whatever. I think I'm willing to move my flag and go put it on that Justin Herbert is not elite hill, bro. And maybe this time I'm wrong, but just a mixture of even the coach there, like you said, 12 one-score games, 7-5 in those games. How many times did they go for it on 4th down, that ended up screwing them in those one-possession games? We know how aggressive he was. So really, I'm not bought in on the Chargers at all. I think once the playoffs come, maybe they'll make the wild card like they did last year. But give me Trevor Lawrence over a guy like Justin Herbert. That's where I'm at right now. Like I said, that NFL list had the top 5. He rounded out the top 5 with Aaron Rodgers, and they had Jalen Hurts out of there, guys like Lamar Jackson. I think that those guys are better than Justin Herbert personally.
Yeah, and I think those guys have maybe done a little bit more in the league too. But as they are pointing out in the comments, I did not mention it, Justin Herbert did get the latest quarterback extension this past offseason, making him the current highest paid player in the NFL. I think he just took over for Jalen Hurts. on that spot. But
This
Justin
is
Herbert,
that Jaylen Brown deal, bro. The NFL right here.
yeah, Justin Herbert to me is a guy still that has something to prove, but he has proven to me at least that the talent is there. I do think he has elite arm talent. I do think he's a good quarterback, but it's just all about, putting it together. And that's what makes you elite. That's what puts you in that top 5 and makes you stay up there from year to year, not just be a guy that's up there for talent. And then when you look at what he has around him, you got Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, who did get hurt because of the coach not wanting to take him out in the last game of the season. So they didn't have him against the Jags. I mean, that's not on him. But anyways, they have talent is what I'm trying to say. Austin Eckler, everything is in place for Justin Herbert to succeed in LA. And it's time this year, especially with that contract. People are going to be looking at him a little bit differently now. Let's look at their odds and their, the outlook for the 2023 season with the schedule. Just looking at the schedule here, you got the Dolphins, Titans, Vikings to start the week off. The Raiders got an early bye week in week 5. You got the Cowboys. They're playing the NFC North. You got the Lions and Packers matched up over there. And then they're also matched up with the AFC East playing the Jets and Bills. And they cap off their season with the Chiefs. Looking at their odds, plus 2,500 to win the Super Bowl, plus 1,300 to win the AFC Championship. I think those odds were a lot shorter last year with all that hype that they had. Over-unders at 9.5. AFC West odds, as we noted earlier, plus 340. And their odds to make the playoffs, a little interesting here, minus 120. And that's probably because of how stacked the AFC is this year. 120, yes, and no, plus 100. And then just want to throw this out there. I know, Ben, you're probably not going to be throwing your money here, but Justin Herbert to win the MVP, plus 1,500. So if you're a believer, you think you can put up the numbers, you think maybe this is the year they reel off 12 wins or something like that. Justin Herbert at plus 1,500, not too bad. Ben, looking at this, anything here appealing to you, or are you, just going to say, same old Chargers and, just move on along down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I did say that I think their ceiling is getting into the playoffs and losing that game as a wild card team. So minus 120 for them to make the playoffs isn't the worst. Not saying that's where I'm going to go and put my money, but the thing that popped out was in week 5, they have their bye week. And this is a team that we know Austin Eckler misses time. We know Keenan Allen tends to miss time. We know Mike Williams tend to miss time. So an early bye week for a team of guys that, have a pretty injury-riddled past and tend to deal with little bumps and bruises throughout the year and miss some games, I don't like that for them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, not a fan of the early bye week myself. It really doesn't do a team like this any favors. But I overall outlook for the Chiefs, looking for the Chargers, looking at the schedule, I think they have a lot of winnable games, but they also have a tough November. Jets, Lions, Packers, Ravens. I don't think the Packers are going to be as bad as everybody thinks they are going to be. They got a good roster around Jordan Love. We'll see what they'll look like at that point in the season, but nonetheless, still a pretty tough week of November there for them. So other than that, I think they're going to have enough, to make the playoffs. I don't know if I'll dabble with the minus 120 like you were talking, but we'll see. Let's look at the offseason. Let's see what they've done so far before we get into fantasy talk, because that's probably the most appealing thing. What were you going to say, Ben?
Mondo in the comments asking if we've gone over the Broncos yet. No, Mondo, they came in last. Therefore, we go over them last, them losers.
Yeah, so you can stick around, Mondo. Hopefully, you'll give your take in the comments for the Broncos once we get
Hey, we know those epic Mondo, we talking about sports, Broncos predictions are, baby.
Yeah, we need one of those here tonight, so hopefully we'll get that from him. But looking at the draft, they added to the arsenal for Justin Herbert. They drafted Quentin Johnson, who some thought was going to be the first receiver coming off the board earlier in the process. He fell down a little bit to number 21 to the Chargers. Were you surprised to see them take a receiver, Ben? Or do you think that fits their mold?
No, I was a little surprised, to be honest, because, we've seen them kind of get it done with guys like Palmer and I believe Carter off of their bench. So I was a little surprised, but I mean, I don't know if Keenan Allen or what Mike Williams or Keenan Allen's contract looked like, or if anybody's coming up, but I was pretty surprised to see them go wide receiver round 1.
Yeah, and then in the middle of the draft, they addressed the defense. They got defensive end and linebackers for some Pac-12 players out of USC and Washington State, and then they got another receiver from TCU, Quentin Johnston's teammate, and then they wrapped up the draft with taking the quarterback
Damn
from
it,
TCU.
boy.
They got Max Duggan, so who knows? Maybe they got a backup plan for Justin Herbert too if things go sour, but we'll see when we get there. And then just looking at the free agency stuff, they did sign Eric Kendricks, a pretty serviceable linebacker, to replace Kyle Van Noy, who left this past offseason. And the guy that we talked about last year, I threw him on the list here as a key addition because he's lived one of the best lives to date. Chase Daniel, he's no longer there. He's not going to collect another backup check from the Chargers this offseason. And then they did lose the receiver that you mentioned, DeAndre Carter, to the Raiders this past offseason. So, Ben, in conclusion for the Chargers this year, I think we're both on the same page. They still have a lot to prove. We don't know if they're going to do it, and we don't believe enough in them to, say, hey, we're willing to put down some money on them to, prove it. We need to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
It's like Santa Claus. You got to see it to believe it.
They're a tricky team, and I mean, I think that they'll be an overs team because the offense is pretty good, and I feel like when they're dogs, that would be the time to take them, not when they're favorites, just because of how sporadic, the coaching is, shit, even the quarterback play. We saw last year, the play calling, all that shit, you really don't know what you're going to get. It's random. So if they're dogs, I'd say, hey, go fetch a bone. But, yeah, I really don't feel any type of way about them.
And I think the other thing that's, going to be around this team, and I don't want to say I hope because I never want to look at, somebody's job and call for it. But I think the coach, Staley, he's going to be on the hot seat this year. People already question his play calling decisions. People I've been hearing talk about, his fourth down decision making. He came in hot going for it on fourth down every single time. And then this past season, he was pretty questionable. He was kicking field goals in that playoff game instead of going for it on 4th and 1. Like on the 2-yard line or something like that. So, he has a lot to prove too as a coach, I think, this year. And so there might be more changes for the Chargers coming if they don't come to their hopes don't come to fruition this offseason. So, I mean, this season.
Ron said he'll take that Herbie for MVP ticket. And, it sucks that Ron couldn't be on with us tonight, right? But, yeah, Ron would be the only one wanting that ticket.
Yeah. Justin Herbert is one of his boys, so yeah, plus 1,500, not that bad of odds, though, especially if the Chargers do put it together this year. So let's go to their fantasy outlook. Probably the most exciting thing when you talk about this team, and a lot of questions. I don't want to say questions, but with the Austin Eckler stuff that's out there and the whole running back situation does put a little cloud there. But anyways, Herbert QB7, Eckler running back 2. This is all PPR, by the way. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, wide receivers 15 and 29. Quentin Johnston, the rookie receiver from TCU, wide receiver 49. And then Gerald Everett, who was a good streaming option for most of the year, tight end 15, with some pretty good performances there. Ben, I know you're not a Keenan Allen fan. Mike Williams, pretty much in the same, I don't want to say same boat, but he's on that, hit or miss range in terms of he goes off one week, might be missing the next few. What's your thoughts on the Chargers in terms of fantasy?
To be honest with you, I mean, obviously, like I said, I'm planting my flag on Justin Herbert is an elite, so I don't want nothing to do with Justin Herbert. For the Austin Eckler angle, I think him, like if I have picked 2 or 3, I would say mostly 3. The way the drafts are going is it's either Jefferson or CMC. It's 1 and 2, right? Then you have the choice between Jamar Chase, Austin Eckler, and everybody else. I really don't want to be in that spot, to be honest with you.
It's a tough spot. I have the number 4 pick in one of my leagues, and I'm dreading that.
Yeah.
Because I even get the leftovers from what you just decided or what you
mentioned. Right. And honestly, that might be a little bit better, bro, because if the guy in front of you kind of just makes the decision for you, I always prefer it when it's a toss-up like that. Now, it's also running back and receiver there between Chase and Austin Eckler. So what do you value more, right? Receiver or running back? But I don't want to be in that spot, man. He was an option that I could have kept, and I decided, I don't want to do that. What I do like here is Keenan Allen. I like Keenan Allen as a wide receiver 2 on fantasy
Wow,
rosters.
I never thought I
Yeah,
would hear the words out of your
I
mouth.
know, I know.
You like Keenan
He
Allen.
he
Wow.
kind of proved me wrong last year. I mean, if you're playing full point PPR, this dude's getting 8, 9
He's a
receptions for
monster.
40 yards and shit, bro. So if he's gonna give you 15 points, just getting 9 receptions and 40 yards, so be it, right? But yeah, Keenan Allen as a wide receiver 2. Other than that, I don't have much interest in this offense.
And in terms of kind of where he's been going in the past, I gotta say that's some value for Keenan Allen, a wide receiver 15. That puts him in a good range, especially if you maybe went running back early on in the draft and you need to round out your receiving core, or maybe just get it started depending on what you did at the beginning of your
Yeah.
draft. Keenan Allen, definitely a good option there. And for me, that's probably the only one that I'm looking at here. I'm a big fan of Mike Williams, but he's injury prone. And he is on that, inconsistency range. Although I would say last year and the year before, he did have some pretty good performances. But it's just the injuries that you worry about with Mike
I also
Williams.
feel like that Quentin Johnson guy that they got is kind of like a Mike Williams type. So I think that Keenan Allen has his role, right, as a more of like DeAndre Hopkins
Yep.
type of receiver. He's going to be that possession guy, the guy that's going to move the chains for you. Like we said, you can rely on about 6 to 9 receptions a game. The yardage is going to be the thing. So Bull says Mike Williams is a cheat code at wide receiver 2 or flex. I personally think Keenan Allen, he's going maybe a round and a half before I would go Keenan Allen as a wide receiver 2.
Yep. And Bull, to your point, the past few years at wide receiver 2 or flex, and especially where you get Mike Williams in drafts, like an 8 or 9 range in terms of the round, a pretty good value there. But
He's not
I'm
there
with Ben.
anymore, right?
Not really. He's maybe in like the 6 or 7 range now, but Keenan Allen, definitely the guy that I'm looking at here, just because I view that as value at wide receiver 15 for a guy like Keenan Allen. Gerald Everett, streaming option at tight end 15. Would you, if you punt on a guy, or if you punt on a position like tight end, are you drafting Everett, or are you trying to draft a guy before you get to that point?
I'm usually always punting at tight end unless I'm in that 6 or 7 spot and I'm going to get Kelsey. I'm more than likely going to punt. But Gerald Everett's not going to even be the guy that I punt on. He might be, the guy that I punt on has a bye week, and Gerald Everett might be the guy that fills in that week. I think that would be it.
Yeah, because I think the Chargers, another offense, you look at the weapons that we have listed here on the board, they're going to spread it out, and it could be a different guy any given week. Or they could support 2 guys, but your guy's the one that's left out, like Eckler and Allen eat, and Mike Williams gets left out one week, and then, vice versa. You just want to find the one that's most consistent. And I think as we've highlighted, Eckler, that's Captain Obvious right there, but Keenan Allen is probably going to be the most consistent non-Austin Eckler option out of this Chargers core, I would say. So anything else on the Chargers, Ben, that you want to cover?
No, bro, I'm good. I'm gonna go make a drink real quick while you intro the Raiders, and I'll be right back.
All right, well, let's get into it. For those of you guys that are watching here, thank you. We are about 38 or 40 minutes into the podcast, so appreciate you guys that have been watching with us throughout. This is the AFC West Breakdown. We are on the 3rd place team here. We got the Las Vegas Raiders. They are the team that is picked to come in last this year. They were 6-11 last year, 4-4 at home, 2-7 on the road. They split against the division, had some pretty exciting games there in Las Vegas. 7-5. Oh, excuse that stat there, but 13 of their games were decided by 1 score or less. They were 4-9 in those games. So they played a lot of close games last year. If you guys remember, I think it was that Patriots game. That's one of them that went in their favor. But the Raiders were involved in some crazy games last year. A lot of them didn't go in their favor. They made the offseason acquisition last year to get Devontae Adams, pair him up with Derek Carr, their old college teammates. That match really didn't work. Stat-wise, it did. Devontae Adams ended up putting up his numbers, but it didn't lead to W's for them per se. And, out with the old, in with the new. Derek Carr no longer there. Jimmy Garoppolo pictured up there is going to be taking over at quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders. So let's get into it when we're looking at their their season schedule for 2023. Excuse me. There's 2023 season schedule. They get started off with the Denver Broncos, a team that's picked to come in third with them here. And if I'm reading this schedule right, they'll go against the Bills. To me, looking at the start of the schedule, it's a toss-up for against the Denver Broncos. But after that, it's pretty tough. You got the Bills, Steelers, Chargers all back-to-back to 3 weeks in a row. Then you got the Packers. That's a tough weeks to start the season. The Patriots, you expect them to be competitive. And you got the Bears, who people are expecting to be good this year, although I'm not one of them. And the Lions, we could be looking at a team. This could be the number one pick, honestly, if that's depending how the season gets started. They start off, I can see a 2-6 these first 8 weeks. I can see a 1-7, depending on how things are going. Because Jimmy G at quarterback, he is one of those guys that was fortunate to be playing in San Francisco and at quarterback. I mean, he fit the system well, but we saw that, they put in Brock Purdy, things kept on moving. So Jimmy G, I don't think is a needle shifter. So that's why you see these odds here, over under 6.5 to win the AFC plus 4,000, to win the AFC West plus 1,200, to make the playoffs plus 360. Yes. Minus 450. No. And Jimmy G to win MVP. I just threw that in there for fun. Plus 8,000. This was a team that you were all in on last year. I know you're not going to be all in on them this year. What are your thoughts on the Raiders? Do you think they're going to get close to that 6.5 total?
I think that they can flirt with it. I do. I mean, you see games like they got, the Giants, the Colts, the Dolphins, the Lions, the Bears. I think that they can win some of those games. The big question is going to be the guy, in that picture down there, and if they're going to be able to rely on him suiting up on game day. To be honest with you, on all of these, that might be it. That's 6.5. I would think maybe the over. But they could just be a 6-win team this season. So I don't know, man. Jimmy G tends to just straddle that line and kind of keep a team afloat, right? He never really, unless it's in the Super Bowl and he doesn't make those 1 or 2 big throws that he needs to make, he never really costs his team the game. Everywhere he goes, he usually has, some sort of control over the offense. Ron says Jimmy G over Carr, let's be honest. So I think that if anything, maybe that over 6.5, not something I'm willing to go on the record on, but I'm not very excited to watch the Raiders play. Sure. They are that team that usually kicks off on that later slate because they play in Vegas. But yeah, not really looking forward to the Raiders.
Honestly, I like the under here because I looked at the schedule after I talked about the first 8 games, and then you got the Giants, Jets, Dolphins, Chiefs, and Vikings, Chargers. Yeah, this is a tough schedule. I don't think that the Raiders are going to get very many wins. Ben, you mentioned it. They have a disgruntled star and Josh Jacobs, who is arguably their best player other than Devontae Adams. So I don't have very high hopes for this Raiders team. I'm not a very big fan of Jimmy G. As a centerpiece. I think they're going to ask him to do more in this role. They're going to ask him to air it out a little bit more, I think. So I don't know. I don't have high expectations for the Raiders this year. I would go on the under here. I know last year one of my unders was the Bears. I think this year the Raiders, just starting off the year, with these divisional breakdowns, the Raiders under 6.5 is a play that I'll probably be making shortly after this podcast.
Okay, there we go. And that's my favorite part of these, bro, is going over it and being like, you know what? Yeah, this is something I'm going to play. So first under of the year right here with we had like maybe 2 or 3 unders last season with the Bears, the Texans, and I forget the last team. I don't know if it was the Panthers or who it might have been. But yeah, first under of the year here with the Raiders.
Yep, and we got a pod bet already. Ron is buying the Raiders here. He's got over 7. His boy Jimmy G, he's backing them this year to get that done for him. So we'll see when you get on the pod. We'll discuss the specifics of this bet. But let's get into the fantasy lookout here for the Raiders. I know we've talked about Josh Jacobs a lot being disgruntled, which, we can talk about here when the little fantasy roster gets pulled up. But, oh, excuse me, I'm just skipping right over the offseason. Let's go back to it real quick because they did have a high draft pick, and I'm sorry about that. But they did have the number 7 pick last year. They drafted Tyree Wilson, the edge rusher out of Texas Tech. We know the Raiders like to do their own thing, but this wasn't so much of that because Tyree Wilson was a highly touted prospect coming into the draft. A lot of people had him going in contention at the number 2 or 3 spot, but didn't go his way, ended up dropping 7 to the Raiders. They drafted Michael Mayer, another highly touted prospect at tight end from Notre Dame. A pretty good guy was either him or the tight end from Utah. The name is escaping me though. Kincaid. And then they got a guy from Alabama. Can't go wrong there on the defensive line, excuse me. And then another receiver out of Cincinnati to help out that offensive line. A pretty full draft for them. Got a lot going on there. Got a lot of picks. And then in the offseason, we talked about Jimmy G. They did add Austin Hooper. They did pay Jacoby Myers. They gave him some pretty decent money. Good for him. He got paid the receiver from the Patriots, O.J. Howard on tight end. DeAndre Carter, we mentioned him earlier, got him over from the Chargers. And then they addressed the defense there with Spillane and Faison. We mentioned Carr leaving. And then we mentioned it last podcast because we talked about the 49ers, but Clyde Farrell, the defensive end from Clemson, they drafted him number 4 a few years ago. He didn't make it to his second contract, which is surprising for an edge rusher, but the production just was not there for them. And then this last name I can't see. Mac Hollins, receiver from the Falcons, who I don't know if you've seen the videos. He's looking pretty jacked in training camp right now. I've seen a couple of videos on social media. He's throwing the corners around there. Ben, when you look at this offseason for the Raiders, do you like what they did in the draft? Do you have any thoughts on Jacoby Myers getting paid?
I never liked taking a defensive player out of Texas Tech. I mean, tell me the last time that you've ever heard of a guy out of Texas Tech, come out and be good. They don't play defense. I mean, let's be real. That I don't like that at all. I was pretty happy that they took Mayer and it allowed the Bills to take Kincaid because I like Kincaid a little more, but Mayer is more of like a blocking and receiving tight end, so he's a little more well-rounded. Not necessarily what the Bills are looking for because they want that red zone target. But I was happy when they did that. They got themselves a solid player there to replace Darren Waller. But yeah, man, for them, another coaching change for them, right? They have a rookie head coach coming in this year. Sure. Or is it still McDaniels?
It's still McDaniels.
Okay, it's still McDaniels.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen what McDaniels. He never wanted to leave the tit over there with Bill Belichick. He finally did, and he's finding out that life isn't all roses and cherries. So I don't like what the Raiders have going on. Do you think that it was obviously it's a great idea for the business part and all that, but do you think that it's just hard to maintain like some sort of professional level in Las Vegas as far as NFL goes? I know that the Knights have done it and they finally won their Stanley Cup, but they're Russians, bro. They're not really into all this shit.
I just think it's the franchise, dude. I mean, the Raiders had these problems when they were in Oakland. You can put them in San Antonio. They're going to have these problems. You can put them in in North Dakota. I think they still have these problems because the franchise is just not run the right way. You saw what they did. They gave a huge contract to John Gruden. He didn't even make it. 3 or 4 years into that, although he was, kind of blown up in that whole email thing, but neither here nor there. But that's just, how the things are done with the Raiders. You had Devontae Adams, who was disgruntled this whole offseason. I think he's been asking out. You got Josh Jacobs, who's been asking out or asking for a new contract, saying that he's not going to show up to camp and stuff like that. So I really don't buy into, the whole Las Vegas thing. I think you can be successful. I know it's a little bit different with hockey players, but hey, they're right there playing downtown Las Vegas or right there off the strip. So I think they're fine. They just need to get some stability here. I don't know if Jimmy G is the guy to do it. I know he, in the past, like you said, is kind of Mr. Stability, but I don't know if if he's going to be the guy to right the ship for the Raiders per se. But looking at their offseason, I do kind of like what they did with drafting Michael Mayer. I think that's going to be a good, decent target for Jimmy G. And then, adding a guy like Jacoby Myers, who's a reliable target. I'm not, in love with the contract, but I think his stats, the production that he put up in New England with Mac Jones throwing to him, got to give him props for that. So you got to wonder what he's going to do in a slightly better, offensive situation. So going to be an interesting team to look at throughout the year, especially if they get off to a bad start. But any other comments from you, Ben, here on this offseason for them?
No, I mean, well, I really want to have that conversation about Devontae Adams here now that we got to the fantasy thing, because there's going to be question marks about Josh Jacobs. I think coming up to, preseason and coming up to the first week of the season. That's why I think drafting your fantasy football draft should always be, either the last week of August or the first week of September because of things like this. But the thing with Devontae Adams, I know Bull said in the comments, I'll pass on Devontae Adams as a first-round wide receiver this year. Are you willing to get him, even on the comeback, just based off we know him being disgruntled? We know it's Jimmy G. Jimmy G doesn't always put up the biggest numbers, right? We know they have Hunter Renfrow and a couple of other options. There was another guy that did pretty decent last year for them, but is he on your no draft board? If he falls to you, maybe you're pick 8, pick 7, and he falls to you on the way back, are you taking Devontae Adams? Would you want a guy like Waddle over Adams, or
that's a good
Deebo
question.
Samuel over Adams? Like,
I'd probably go Adams over both of those guys still. Waddle I like as a player. I'm so scared about that Tua situation, just because if Tua goes down and he's already proven to get hurt, who knows what's going to happen to Waddle's value. But with Devontae Adams, I am worried about him being disgruntled, but as long as he shows up to camp, I'm fine with it. I think they're going to spam it to him. If anything, I didn't even mention they don't even have Darren Waller anymore. They traded him the day after his wedding to New York, so they don't have him. He's not on the team anymore.
Because he didn't invite the coach.
That's also part of the reason why they had so many picks this past draft. But Darren Waller no longer with the team, so I like Devontae Adams this year. It's a little bit of value in terms of where he's been at historically. But yeah, give me Devontae Adams. I'll take him on the comeback in that situation that you just noted.
Like at 10, if you get 2 picks back to back, are you maybe taking a running back, maybe like a Saquon and Devontae combo? Are you going maybe back to back receiver?
Yeah, I'd go back to back receiver, or get a stud running back and Devontae Adams there on the turn. Just because I do think there is value there with him not having Darren Waller to compete for targets, although Darren Waller, staying on the field is a challenge. But Devontae Adams, I think he's quarterback proof. I think he proved it last year. He's going to put up numbers no matter who's throwing him the ball. And Jimmy Garoppolo is capable. He supported Deebo and Kittle and Ayuk. They all had some pretty good weeks with Garoppolo at helm. But I think the most interesting guy on this list is Josh Jacobs. He led the league in rushing last year. He was running back 1 in terms of rushing yards. He's a running back 6 this year. I had that stat in there. Running back 19 going into 2022. So he jumped up 13 spots in terms of his ranking in ESPN this year because of his on-the-field production. But he's part of that running back, group that's disgruntled about their contract situations, a running back union, if you will, looking to get a whole collective bargaining agreement just for the running backs, which, depending who you talk to, might be warranted, but neither here nor there. My question to you, Ben, is, are you worried about a guy who holds out and, let's say, misses some preseason games, misses some training camp? He's obviously not there. He's training, he's staying in shape, but he can only do so much on his own with his trainers, which I'm sure he's good on. But are you worried about the injury aspect or anything like that?
Not only that, but I'm also worried about motivation aspect, right? Because if he's not that motivated and he's not really into it, I know that they say you really you can't take plays off in the NFL because you could get really injured, and especially at something like running back. But I could see him maybe not running as hard, maybe not trying to break those extra tackles and risk getting injured playing on that franchise tag or last year of his deal, whatever it is. I believe it's a franchise tag. But it's not somebody I want to touch, man, to be honest, because it's an offense that they're going to be loading the box now with Jimmy G. Maybe it wasn't as loaded last year with Derek Carr just because he is more of an air it out guy, not scared to throw the interception, right? But new quarterback getting into the system. Yes, they can be throwing passes, to Devontae Adams, quick passes. But as far as Josh Jacobs, not with a 10-foot pole this season, bro. I wouldn't touch him.
Yeah,
and it sucks coming off such a historic year for himself, right? The best year of his career.
Yeah, definitely unfortunate the situation that he finds himself in. Hope he gets paid. I'm always, team get your money. So hopefully he gets himself a contract or at least a resolution that has him back on the field. But real quick question for you, just a shortened version of start flex cut. Jacoby Myers, flex zone, yes or no for you this year? No? Okay. I'm just asking because he finds himself there in the 30 range or 30s. So he's there in that flex range. So let's wrap up this divisional breakdown with the last place team from last year, Mr. Unlimited himself, Russell Wilson, and the new look Denver Broncos when you talk about their head coach, Sean Payton, who's been in the headlines recently talking crap about the former head coach, Nathaniel Hackett, in his preseason press conferences. But 2022 for the Broncos was nothing short of a disappointment, starting from the homecoming game for Russell Wilson against the Seahawks that we talked about last pod. 5-12, 4-4 at home, not gonna get it done. 1-8 on the road, terrible. 1-5 against the division, missed the playoffs. Last year, they did have a lot of close games because the defense was pretty good for most of the year. The defense found themselves in the top 5 for a good part of the year before they just said, hey, we can't keep this up anymore. 13 games decided by 8 points or less, 4-9 in those games. Not something that you'd expect when you have a quarterback like Russell Wilson at the helm. But in the words of Sean Payton, it was the worst coaching job of all time. Ben, any problem with those comments coming from another coach like Sean Payton? You saw Aaron Rodgers upset about it, saying, keep my boy's name out of your mouth. What do you think about this whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that bulletin board material. It's a way out for their players, maybe a way to get Russell Wilson some confidence back. Like, hey, buddy, don't worry, new system. I'm going to make it better. Listen, I'm not denying that Sean Payton's a better coach than Nathaniel Hackett. He'd be a better coach if he was blind. He'd still be a better coach than Nathaniel Hackett. But, bro, I mean, you don't have to go that route.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
It's supposed to be like the boys club, and then you just go out there and rip a dude who, took a demotion, got hired as the OC or quarterback's coach.
Or Aaron Rodgers' best friend, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't like it. I do understand it, though. It's getting the confidence back. And, I mean, with this team, bro, I do expect a little bit of progress, right? Because of the new coach. He's going to make the system easier. Things are just going to flow a little bit better. And like you said, last year, the defense was what was keeping them in games, so they got fed up with this guy. We saw them blowing up at him on the sideline and whatnot. I was surprised that Russell Wilson didn't break character last year. I really was surprised that he was able to keep character. That character that he plays, that
says the right thing all the time.
The holiest man that's ever touched land. Yeah, but I was very surprised. I'm not too pumped about him this year. I am interested to see what their schedule looks like. And I know that they had some injuries go down yesterday and today.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That injury you talk about today, Tim Patrick, Achilles is what they're talking. So not good for the Broncos. But
they also said they're releasing KJ Hamler because he had an irregular heartbeat. So that's a guy that they drafted a couple of years ago.
Pretty early.
Now letting him go.
Yeah, a lot of talent too from KJ Hamler. So unfortunate to see that happen. But thank you for that update, Ben. Let's get into the schedule for the Broncos. Let's see if Sean Payton is going to be able to lead this team to glory, get them to the playoffs like everybody thought they were going to be there last year. Looking at their schedule, I think this might be the one from last year, if I'm not mistaken. So just bear with me real quick. Or am I? Yeah, because they're not going to play the Seahawks
They
again.
better not be playing the Seahawks, or else the NFL is rigged as hell. We know that was the first game of the year for them last season. I'm not too sure if the Texans were their second game, but if that's
Okay, I think I got it up right here. So 2023 schedule for the Denver Broncos is going to be the Las Vegas Raiders, Washington Commanders, Miami Dolphins, Chicago Bears, first 4 weeks. What are your thoughts there? Just first 4 weeks.
I think of all winnable games, possibly. I don't think that it's a tough schedule at all. I mean, we're talking about the Commanders, and I can't even name you their quarterback off the top of my head, Sam Howell. But I
Howell.
mean, come on, Sam Howell. And you said first they got the Raiders, another team who you just said that you're probably going to take that under for them. So, 2-2, 3-1, I would say best case scenario for them after the first four.
Pretty winnable. So weeks 5 through 8, New York, Kansas, and that's the New York Jets, excuse me. The Chiefs on the road, Green Bay at home, and then they get the Chiefs again. They got their 2 games against the Chiefs in 3 weeks, and they get the Chiefs at home in week 8. So Jets, Chiefs, Packers, and Chiefs again. What do you think about those 4?
Well, I'm glad that we get to see that game against the Jets, right? Because Sean Payton's gonna have to man up on that sideline, and Aaron Rodgers might have a little payback for his boy. So I am excited for that. That better be primetime.
Yeah. So then they get their bye week in week 9. And so Ben, real quick, do you like their chances in those 4 weeks, or do you think this is where the season kind of hits the skids for the Broncos?
I could see 1-3. I could see at best 2-2, but I think that this is where we really find out about them. I think that early on they have winnable, favorable matchups. I think we'll see them be dogs in maybe 3 out of these 4 games.
Yep. I agree. The only one that'll maybe be a toss-up is probably that Green Bay game, because who knows what Green Bay is going to be like this year with Jordan Love. So then they get the bye, and then week 10, and let's finish it off here. I'm going to break it down again in 4s. Buffalo on the road, Minnesota at home, Cleveland at home, and the Texans on the road. I can see 2-2 or 1-3 in those games, depending how the Browns are. Maybe 3-1. I don't see them beating the Bills at home. On the road.
Yeah, those are all going to be pretty competitive games. As a Bills fan, I do like to see the Broncos on the schedule because I think that's one of their for sure losses out of these 4 games. So it's going to be an interesting season for them. I think that what's based off their schedule strength. I know that maybe we don't have it on
number 23.
23. So I was going to say it's got to be one of the easier schedules just based off of how shitty they did last season.
Yep.
So that is a little reward for Sean Payton coming in and taking over such a bum team.
And then they finish off the season, and I mentioned the end of that stretch was on the road at Houston. That's the start of a 3-game road trip, because followed by that it's the Chargers on the road, Detroit on the road, and then they get New England and the Chargers at home, and they end the season in Las Vegas. So that's Chargers, Detroit, Lions, New England Patriots, Los Angeles Chargers again, and then the Las Vegas Raiders. What do you think about the end of the season for the Raiders there?
I think that's probably one of the better stretches of their season. If they're still in play, they may be going for it there at the end. So I know that the schedule that we have up here is not right, but the over-under's got to be right, because last year they weren't 6.5, right?
Yeah, no, these are right. These are all right, and it's a good point, good call out to get to these odds, because these are drastically different from last year, probably double from what they were in terms of odds going into the regular season. To win the Super Bowl, 4,000, AFC Championship plus 2,500, season win total over under 6.5. I think their win total last year was either 9.5 or 10, something crazy like that. To win the AFC West, plus 550. They're picked to come in 3rd. To make the playoffs, yes, plus 180. No, minus 210. And then, hey, is Russell Wilson washed, or is he going to have a comeback season? Russell Wilson to win the MVP, plus 4,500. And the guy that we've been talking about a lot, maybe don't like his antics, but he is a good coach. Sean Payton, Coach of the Year, plus 900. I can see some value there. Ben, what say you about these odds?
Yeah, and I know Mondo said over 6.5 easy. And here Allen says over 6.5 as well. I think Mondo said it too. Listen, we don't need that double-digit win prediction from Mondo this year. That over 6.5. I ain't gonna front. I'm kind of liking it a little bit as well. Over 6.5 for them. I mean, unless Russell Wilson just turns into like Drew Brees his final year, right?
And it's just wash noodle arm or something.
Like noodle armed. Yeah, exactly. These guys like to say, oh, Russell Wilson throws the best deep ball, whatever. So he still has, an arm to speak of. So I didn't think that I'd see myself going with that over 6.5, but just based off the schedule that we read, I do think that they can win 7 games, bro. I mean, they can still go under 500 and cash that over 6.5.
I can see 7 or 8 wins on the schedule for the Broncos here, and a lot of it is just because last year they needed to get it together. Like they had so many games where there was mishaps. Like Sean Payton did have a good point. There was a lot of blunders, a lot of bad play calls, a lot of rookie mistakes out there from the players and the coach.
Yeah, they had Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, and Uncle Shannon Sharp tripping that one game where Nathaniel Hackett wasted about 45 seconds, called a timeout with 23 seconds left after having like a full 3 timeouts and decided to kick a 62-yard field goal and lose the game.
Exactly. Just shit like that.
Yeah, they did have a lot of blunders. Bull also says they get 7 in week 16. So I'm going on the record. I'll go over 6.5.
Okay. So over 6.5 is in play for the podcast here for the Broncos. Just a combination of an easier looking schedule from last year. You bring in Sean Payton, and you just have to think that those same mistakes that were made last year in a lot of those close games, we said there's about 13 of them, that they're not going to make those same mistakes. And, those close games, usually a good sign of, hey, the coin might flip their way the next season. So they win 2 or 3 or more of those games. They're in play for this over 6.5. So yeah, let's all get behind it here. It seems like we're getting some buyback here in the comments on the over 6.5 as well. So let's just, one for the whole squad here, over 6.5 on the Broncos. Let's not regret
Mondo,
it.
if they let us down, damn it, Mondo.
And
we're going to have you do one of those things that they, like a punishment that they make last place in the fantasy football doing. And you're going to have to ride for it because this would be the 3rd year in a row that they screw it up.
Yeah, and we've had some pretty zesty predictions on the Broncos these past few years, but this one's a little bit tapered, over 6.5. It's one of those buy low spots. We're buying low. You're buying low. That's all that it is.
You see? Here he comes with a double-digit 11-6.
Oh my God!
3rd year in a row, Mondo predicts double-digit wins for the Broncos. They're 0-2 in the previous 2 years when he does that.
It's a rite of passage. Mondo has to do it, and I respect it. But looking at the draft and their offseason real quick before we wrap up for the evening, they didn't have a first-round pick, but their first pick in the 2nd round did address the offense with Marvin Mims Jr. out of Oklahoma, Drew Sanders from Arkansas in the 3rd round, and then Riley Moss from Iowa at safety. In the 3rd round as well. All those guys expected to contribute early on. Key additions, Frank Clark on the edge. I like that. Mike McGlinchey, they signed him, a pretty serviceable right tackle over the years. Zach Allen, defensive lineman, paid him some pretty good money. P. Ryan, bring him over from Cincinnati to help shore up that backfield that's oft injured. Ben Powers, Jarrett Stidham, Troutman, and Callaway, some of Sean Payton's guys from New Orleans, both the former New Orleans players.
Don't let Bull see Callaway on the draft board.
So Sean Payton's bringing back the boys, and then they did have some key departures. They lost Draymond Jones, a pretty good defensive lineman, got a pretty good contract from the Seahawks. Chase Edmonds was a one and done with the Broncos. He signed with the Bucks this past offseason. And then they lost one of their star fantasy players, Brandon McManus, kicker, signed with the Jaguars, no longer there. And then they also lost Graham Glasgow, and Latavius Murray found himself another home this offseason with Ben's Bills, hoping to steal some more carries from another running back like he usually does. Ben, your thoughts on this offseason real quick before we do fantasy talk.
I mean, I don't hate it. Marvin Mims, he was a problem for Texas. We saw him a lot in the Big 12. He's a pretty good receiver. And with the receiver injuries that we talked about when we introduced the Broncos team, he's going to be seeing himself getting some playing time, it seems like, right away, as long as he doesn't have any setbacks at camp. But I do like what they did for the most part. They filled in a lot of different positions. I like that they went a lot of defense as well, some O-line in the free agency. So can't be mad at it. Overall, you got to think that they're going to be better than last year. Last year, what did they end with? 5 or 6 wins?
I think they were 5-12.
5-12. So let's be 2 games better, right? That's what every team strives for, is to have a better record than the last season. I think that was their floor last year for these guys. I will say another good thing about the head coaching change and the fact that Sean Payton believes in Russell Wilson more than, the common person, is that maybe, the team, the locker room, some had said that the locker room had been lost or split just with the treatment that Russell Wilson was getting. So maybe it's a new opportunity for the whole team to buy into a new coach and a new system and maybe start over fresh for them. So I will say, I think they have that going for them.
I like that angle. Always a good thing to have a breath of fresh air in the locker room in the form of a head coach like Sean Payton. So let's get into it. We're all a little bullish on the Broncos in terms of their win total over 6.5. Everybody seems to like that. But looking at their fantasy outlook, might not be the most fantasy-friendly team. Russell Wilson, quarterback 16. Javonte Williams, who I think started the season or the offseason not on the PUP. So a good sign, because he did leave the year last year with a nasty injury against the Raiders.
Torn ACL.
Running back 30, torn ACL. Samaje Perine, running back 35. So they're grouped up there right in the middle. And then Judy and Sutton at 24 and 44. They were grouped a lot closer last year, but Judy's got some separation. And then you got Greg Dulcich at tight end 14. So Ben, just looking at the Broncos, are you buying on Judy? Are you touching Sutton with a 10-foot pole?
I'm buying Judy, and maybe if Sutton falls on my lap as maybe a flex option or the first wide receiver on my bench, but I almost rather go with some of the rookies that got drafted this year later on in about the range that he's going. The rookie wide receiver for the Seahawks, or somebody like Jordan Addison from Minnesota. There's guys out there. So I will say I do like Judy, maybe as a wide receiver number 2, kind of like what I was talking about with Keenan Allen. You know what I mean? I think he's going to be a high target option for them. I do think Sean Payton will be able to get creative with Judy. So I do like Judy. Williams, I was on him last year. He's coming in injured. And I know it's just rankings, but 30 and 35 tells me they're expecting a pretty much split backfield, at least till he gets his bearings back, coming back from that injury. So, if you can draft Williams, maybe you already have your 2 running backs and he's one of those bench running backs for you that you can kind of sit on him for a bit. You're not depending on him to score points for you right off the rip. I would look at him, but Judy for me.
Yeah, I like Judy to be a solid receiver too. I like him fitting into that Sean Payton system. He's going to find a way to exploit his talents a little bit better, I would think. So Jerry Judy looking to have a pretty good year in my estimation. And Javonte Williams, tough. He's in that zone of running backs that I usually don't like, but he's a young running back. When he was on the field last year, I think he showed some promise. The team wasn't so good, so you really weren't able to tell, but he did show some flashes here and there, put a couple of games together before the injury, was trending the right direction. So he's a guy I just got to see it on the field, got to see what he looks like after that injury. I'm not willing to bet on him with the roster spot.
He was considered like that 3-down running back type of guy. The guy, and now with them bringing in Perine, a guy that we saw be a 3rd-down back for Cincinnati in the past. I think maybe they brought him in kind of to lower the load for Williams, and maybe just make him that 2-down back and have P. Ryan in there on third downs.
Yeah, definitely a telling sign when you bring in a guy like P. Ryan of your intentions for that backfield. So a very good point there, Ben. Anything else fantasy-wise to talk about here with the Broncos as we conclude things for the evening?
I mean, maybe still their kicker, right? They play in elevation. The ball tends to travel a little further there. I don't know who their kicker is, but they were a team that settled for a whole lot of field goals last year.
Yep.
They tend to travel a little further in Denver, so I know the kicker wasn't out there, but if you're punting on kicker, taking that kicker late, I would say maybe their kicker wouldn't be a bad shot.
Hell yeah. I like that, Ben. Good point. And as we conclude things tonight, I do want to point out there was a lot of fantasy talk these past 2 weeks, and it's going to keep on going the next few weeks and throughout the year. So if you guys have any questions between here and now, always feel free to submit the questions, and we'll, create a little segment as we go along here to answer the followers' questions. You can hit us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at those handles above, or pictured for those of you guys that are there watching with us.
Yeah, for sure. If anybody's playing any keeper leagues and maybe has some keeper decisions to make, you don't know, throw them in the mailbag. If you already know your draft position and you're maybe sitting at 4 or 5 and you're like, damn, I don't know whether to pick between this guy or this guy. Or maybe at 7 and 8 and you're tempted to take Bijan Robinson. There's a lot of hype around him. We'll get into that division, but any fantasy questions, man, throw them in here. We'll definitely elaborate on them on the podcast. We're not saying we're always going to have the right answer, but we're willing to have the conversation and kind of try and help figure it out.
Yeah, because that's all it is, just a conversation, just, looking at it from a couple of different angles. Ben might look at it from a different angle than I would, and he might open my eyes, and vice versa. And, that's how you kind of help people along the way, or we help each other, excuse me. But yeah, exciting things coming. We just recapped the AFC West 2022 season, did a little 2023 preview. We're all thinking the Chiefs are going to repeat, safe saying that. Maybe not going to put down that division bet, but we're all liking them to repeat there in the AFC West. I like the Raiders under 6.5.
So we'll make that official.
Yeah, we'll make that official for the pod. And Ben likes, and the rest of the pod likes the over 6.5 for the Broncos. Ben, anything else you want to add to this before we sign off for the night?
No, man. Seems like 6.5 was the number for today. We got an under 6.5 with the Raiders and over 6.5 with the Broncos. Hopefully, it's the Broncos beating the Raiders at the end of the season to cash both bets, bro.
That'd be a sweet victory. Sweet. But yeah, thank you to everybody that's watched with us tonight. We'll have another podcast. Or
do you know who's next, Roland?
The next division that I want to break down for the podcast is going to be the AFC North. Just because there's a lot going on with that division. You got a lot of movement with the Ravens. You had that big injury that happened with Joe Burrow. Don't know what's going to happen with the Bengals. People are thinking he might not be ready for week 1. Who knows what's going on there? But it's definitely going to be the AFC North.
All right, and we got some Steelers fans that tend to listen to the pod. Shout out Diego and Wally. They were both in here tonight. Next week, we got the Steelers, the Browns, the Ravens, and the Cincinnati Bengals. Hopefully, Ron can join us for that one, be in the pocket like Burrow.
Yeah, yes, sir. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ben, as always. I'm Roland, and see you guys later. We talk about sports.